Okay, so in the last episode we got all of the binding onto this neck, including the really tricky part around the cutout for the adjuster wheel and the bit that was giving me kind of quite a few little problems, the transition here into the headstock. But we've kind of got it all done and it's all looking nice. We've got the position markers in along the top and we're good to go. Next thing I want to do is actually to get the frets knocked into this. In a little bit of a break from what I normally do, I've actually got some frets here. They're pre-cut, pre-radius, they've got the tangs notched and everything, so that's going to save me a little bit of work. There's a 24-piece set here. I've only got 21 frets, so we'll have some spares, but they're not stainless, which is what I've used quite a lot recently. These are just kind of your normal nickel frets. In terms of the radius on them, it's a little bit tighter than the 12-inch that we've used, which is ideal. You want them to be a little bit tighter. You don't want them to be exactly what you're using. So that's all good. However, I have messed up because in my rush to get this binding on, I forgot to do something which I usually do, and that's to put a little bit of a chamfer onto the fret slots with a file. Now obviously, because I've put this binding on, that's going to make that job difficult at best. There's the potential it could make it absolutely impossible, but I'm going to give it a go just to see how we do. And I've got this little 3-cornered file that I'm going to try and use on this and just see if I can kind of get a little bit of a start in without damaging the binding too much. And yeah, I think I can. So I'm just going to work my way up and down the board, put a little bit of a chamfer in. And thankfully I've managed to do that. What I did was actually, I was getting the file right into the corner there and just pulling it back, and that was enough to just kind of press the wood in as much as anything, just to give me the chamfer that I want. So that's all gone very nicely. So I can start working my way down the board and get some frets into this. And as is always the case, I'm just going to put a little bit of tight bond down into that fret slot before I start. Which will just help keep things in place. And then I'm sure people have seen me do this in the past, but it's just a case then of sharp tap one end, sharp tap the other to get it sat in, and then from the middle work your way out one way and then the other. Quick clean up, and then I just like to use 10th thou feeler gauge just to make sure everything's seating properly, and then we can work our way on to the next one. So I've got the first 6 in now, so I'm just going to take a little bit of damp tissue and just kind of make sure I'm cleaning up any glue residue that might be on there before it starts to kind of dry up. And I think that's all starting to look really nice, so I'll just press ahead and get the rest done. And there they are, all knocked in. That actually didn't take that long. Probably I'd say about 25 minutes in non-fast forward time, so not really that kind of time consuming. And I've checked them all kind of with a feeler gauge, and they are all kind of down where you'd want them to be. So no issues there. So we can move on to the next step, which is just to kind of clean the ends off a little bit. I'll just snip those down and then just chamfer them off a little bit so they're not too sharp. Okay, so that's the frets trimmed down now to the binding, and I've just put an ever so slight little chamfer on with the little chamfering file. Obviously there's a lot more work needs doing to these frets. They need a full kind of level dress and polish, and we need to address these fret ends properly. But for now they're just done to an extent where they're not razor sharp, and I'm not going to be kind of lacerating myself on them. So with that done, I think we can move on with this element of the build and start to have a closer look at this headstock transition here. So we now have to kind of figure out a way of dealing with this awkward little transition between the binding and the headstock. Now, I had said that I was going to kind of trim this down a little bit just to get rid of that material and kind of give me a straight run into the end of where the kind of rosewood element of this is. And I said, if necessary, that might mean I'd have to move the tuners up a little bit towards the end of the headstock. Now, I said that without really thinking, because logically speaking, if I move the tuners to any degree, that's going to change the angle at which the strings run out to them. And there's the potential that doing that would kind of put an angle onto the string and just make playability and tuning stability on the guitar a little less good. And ultimately, there's always a trade-off between form and function, but I think with something like a guitar, we should always be erring on the side of function. This needs to play nicely and sound good, and if it looks great, that's an absolute bonus. And to that end, I think what I'm going to do is I'm not going to cut this off. I'm going to reprofile it just to make it blend in a little bit more. And I think I can do it looking at it in such a way that it won't look out of place. Again, a few people came through in the comments. Dane, as always, gives me some sage advice, and his advice was kind of blend that in. And I agree. So that's what I'm going to do. The only thing I really need to consider is how I'm going to do it without kind of significantly impacting the binding that's already there. And I think the first part in that is I'm just going to put a little bit of masking tape over that to protect it. In fact, I'll probably put a couple of layers on just in case. And I think I'll get this in the vise and we can have a look at it and see what tools we can get on just to do that work. And I think what I'd like to do is to kind of just use a chisel to kind of scoop some of this material out, but I'm ever so worried about doing that against this kind of quite delicate edge of the binding. I really don't want to damage that if I can help it. I think we'll come the other way. And do it. And I don't actually think I need to take that much off. It's more a matter of just blending it all in and getting rid of that little flat spot. I actually think that's looking okay, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a fettle with a rat tail. Tape off now. Get into it properly. Just scoop a little bit more out. And I've actually gone back in, I've just scooped a little bit more of that out just to blend it in properly. And to be honest, it doesn't look significantly different from a standard Telecaster headstock, just a little bit more rounded in that element, but I think it does now blend in quite nicely with the binding and the fretboard. So yeah, I'm very happy with that. So I'm going to leave it alone. Just move on to the last little job I want to do, which is just to notch out these two little bits of binding into the nut slot. People have said, why don't you leave it and fit the nut into that space? And even though that was one of my earlier ideas, I've come to realise that actually it's not a particularly good idea, because any repair work or anything that needs doing to the nut would be significantly increased by just having those two bits of binding there. And I could guarantee that if anyone other than me came along to do that work in the future, the first thing they'd do is cut the binding out anyway. So we might as well get it done while we're doing it first time round. And to do this, I'm just going to break out the saw again. couple of very quick strokes should take me down to where we need to be. I'll just nibble the waste out with a chisel. And then we've just got a tiny little file. Just to properly clean that out. And there we have that little slot finished, and I think that looks fine. Blind man on a galloping horse would be very pleased to see that. So I think that element has worked out quite nicely, and I also think that the way that that's kind of turned out is actually okay as well. There's probably a little bit more fine sanding I can do just to kind of finesse that a little bit more, but ultimately I think the idea is sound, and we can kind of consider that to be a successful outcome. And the frets are looking very nice as well, so happy with that too. That's a fair old amount of work that we've got through in this episode, so things are starting to move forward with this. So we are starting to get towards a completed neck, which is great. Obviously the big part of this job that needs doing is the carve on the back of the neck. That's my favourite bit, and I know it's the favourite of a lot of other people, and you'll be pleased to know that that will be coming up in the next episode. But we'll leave this one here, so until next time, just make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. It does make a massive difference to the channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few days' time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.